안녕하세요. 원서있는 고양이 제니예요. 오늘은 해리포터 2권 Chapter 11 제니야 Chapter 11 어제 있던 거 이어서 읽어보도록 할게요. 냐옹. Harry turned over. He'd see just the next day in herbology that explained that he'd been calling the snakes off, not egging it on, which he thought angrily, thumbing his pillow. Any fool should have realized. By next morning, however, the snow had begun in the night, had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson term was cancelled. Professor Sprout wanted to fix stocks and scarves on the mandrakes. The tricky operation was just on no one else, nor that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and survive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevy. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione loosed her lesson off to play a game of wizard chess. "The heavens' sake, Harry!" said Hermione, exasperated. The one of Ron's bishops heard in horse, directing up the ward. "Go and find Justin if he's so important to you." So Harry got up and left through the portrait hall, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in daytime, because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting at someone who, by the sound of it, and turned the spread into the bedroom. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free lesson to catch up on some work, and deciding to check the library first. A group of the Hufflepuffs who'd been in herbology were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long line of hollow bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together, and they were having what looked like an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. It was walking towards them, then something what they were saying met his ears, and paused to listen, hidden in the invincibility section. "So anyway," a stout boy was saying, "I told Justin to hide up in our dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as the next victim, just for some days to happen ever since his lesson Potter was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him it'd be done for it. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherin's there on the roofs, is it?" "You definitely think it is Potter, then, Annie?" said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. "Hannah," said the stout boy sullenly, "he's a parson mouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a darn wizard. Have you ever had a decent one with a talk to snakes? They call Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue." There's some heavy murmuring this, and Annie went on. "Remember what was written on the wall? Enemies of the air, beware. Potter has some sort of running with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cats attack. That first year, Creevy was annoying Potter at the cricket match, taking pictures of him while lying in the mud. Next thing we know, Creevy's been attacked. He always seems so nice, though," Hannah uncertainly. "And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he?" Annie lowered his voice mysteriously as the Hufflepuffs bent closer, and Harry edged nearer so they could catch every word. No one knows how he survived that attack, you know who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that. He dropped his voice until he was very more than a whisper and said, "That's probably why you know who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another dark roar competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding." Harry couldn't take it anymore. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been so angry, he would be found the sight that would have been funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and the color was draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Finch-Fletchley." The Hufflepuff worst ears had clearly been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. "What do you want with him?" said Ernie in a quavering voice. "I wanted to tell him what really happened with that snake at the Journaling Club," said Harry. Ernie bit his light lips and then, taking a deep breath, said, "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Then you noticed that after I spoke to it, the snake backed off," said Harry. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, and the wizard trembling as he spoke, "was you speaking Pursuit-tongue and chasing the snake towards Dustin." "I didn't chase it at him," said Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. "He didn't even touch him." "It was a very near miss," said Ernie. "And in case you're getting ideas," he added hastily, "I might tell you that you could trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone's, so I don't care what sort of blood you got," said Harry fiercely. "Why would I want to attack Muggle-borns?" "I would think you hated the Muggles you lived with," said Ernie swiftly. "It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them," said Harry. "I'd like to see you try it." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, ending himself with a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spellbook. Harry blundered up the corridor, barely noticing where he was going when in such a fury. The result was that he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backwards onto the floor. "Oh, hello, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, but it couldn't possibly be anyone else. He spilled on most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive, gloved hands. "All right, Harry," he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could think. "Why are you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry, getting up. "What are you doing in here?" Hagrid held up the lip rooster. "Second one killed this turn," he explained. "It's trying to fix this. It's a blood-sucking bug there. When I leave their master's permission by the charm on the hat and coat." He peered more closely at Harry from under his thick, snow-flecked eyebrows. "You sure are you right? You look a lot hot and bothered." Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying about him. "It's nothing," he said. "I better get going, Hagrid. It's Transfiguration next, and I picked up my books." He walked off, his mind still full about what Ernie said about him. Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen. Ever since he left St. Potter, he was Muggle-born. Harry stumped up the stairs and turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by the strong, icy draught that was blowing through the loose window pane. He was halfway down the passage when he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to shrink at what had fallen over, and as though he stumbled, had dissolved. Justin Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was a nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but blank and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off, and his face wore an expression of shock identical to justice. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a lot of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. He could run, never know he had been there. But he couldn't just leave them lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he had anything to do with this? As he stood there, panicking, a door right next to him opened with a bang. Peeves, the Toku guys, came shooting out. "What? It's Potter with Potter!" cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he spun past them. "What's Potter up to? Why's Potter lurking?" Peeves stopped, halfway through a mid-air somersault. Upside down, he spotted Justin and nearly had on his neck. It felt the right way up, filled his lungs, and before Harry could stop him, screamed, "Attack! Attack! Another attack! No more to look us is safe! Run for your lives! Attack!" Crash! 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 Door after door flew open along the corridor and people flooded out. For several long minutes, there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people kept standing and nearly had his neck. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as the teachers shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a large bang. It was restored silence and ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat than Ernie the Hufflepuff arrived, panting on the scene. "Caught in the act!" Ernie yelled. His face started right, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. "That will do, Macmillan," said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves was stopping overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and nearly had his neck, examining them, Peeves broke into song. "Oh, Potter, what have you done? You're killing up students. You think it's good fun." "That's enough, Peeves!" barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backwards with his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra of the experiment apartment, but nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly had his neck. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of thin air, which shook out to Ernie with instructions to waft to near head and sneak up the stairs. This Ernie did, fanning Nick along with the silent hovercraft. This left Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. "This way, Potter," she said. "Professor," said Harry at once, "I swear I didn't." "This is out of my hands, Potter," said Professor McGonagall curtly. They marched in silence around the corner, and she stopped to before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. "Sherbet lemon," she said. This was evidently a password because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside as the wall behind them split in two. Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase which was moving smoothly upwards like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the wall thud close behind them. They rose upwards in circles, higher and higher, and at last, slightly dizzy, Harry could see a gleaming oak door ahead with a brass knocker in the shape of the griffin. He knew where he was being taken. This must be where Dumbledore lived. 재밌게 들으셨다면 구독과 좋아요 꾹꾹 눌러주시고 다음 영상에서 만나요. 안녕!